My name is Yusuf Sidani. I'm a professor of leadership and business ethics at the Malayan School of Business. I'm very happy to be here to moderate a session that is very close to what I do actually in terms of researching women in leadership. We have a very interesting lineup of speakers, but before that, let me read to you what this panel is all about, if you haven't read it from the program. This panel gathers researchers from various disciplines who will be tackling elements of leadership and discrimination within the workplace, interrogating the cultural and institutional factors which impact women's career paths. By discussing general conceptions of organizational leadership, wage inequalities, and education, as well as the barriers and facilitators to advancement of women in multiple organizational levels. This panel will create a space to think about the opportunities for and challenges of dealing with issues of discrimination against women in the Lebanese landscape. Yep. Okay, so all right, sure. I was told to start, I think. All right. It is working.
Is it loud enough?
Is it loud enough?
It's not working.
It's not working.
I don't think it's close enough. Yeah, would you get it closer?
All right. Is this better? Okay.
Sorry,
Now you got it. So.
You could extend it.
Well, I don't need it. I need it for 1 minute, so I'll just put it.
Yeah, all right.
I'll just keep it for 1 minute. It's very close. All right.
Just give us
I promise you I will not read it again. Khalas, I read it once. So. In 5 minutes, we will just start immediately. Okay. No problem, Dax. Thank you. Thank you. I teach in this classroom and... no, that's fine. I teach in this classroom and we often have this at 6 o'clock in the evening during the winter time, so it becomes total darkness. I think we continue after.
We'll continue. No, continue. It's fine. Right. Everything is working.
Oh, that's all right. Okay. So this is about women in the workplace, about leadership and career challenges, and we have 4 presentations, which I hope to be, and I'm sure are very interesting presentations, which complement each other in various respects. We have Sarah Diab, we have Pascale, we have Nour, Kachicho, and we have Dr. Sawsan Abdulrahim. And I will start with introducing Sarah Diab, who is Senior Internal Auditor at AUB. I will leave it to the individual panelists to introduce themselves in an extensive manner. So if you can kindly, Sarah, just tell us more about yourself beyond what you do as Senior Internal Auditor at AUB. It's very interesting to have a Senior Internal Auditor who deals with numbers and different sorts of things to participate into this interesting panel. Sarah?
Thank you, Dr. Sidani. I'm a senior auditor, right? But I'm also a mother of 2 children. And after my first pregnancy, I felt that I'm really passionate about helping moms to start a healthy journey for themselves and for their children. So I co-founded a Lebanese NGO to promote, protect, and support breastfeeding in Lebanon. And currently I am working on my doctorate research, and it's about social marketing, which is marketing for a social cause. And it is in the context of breastfeeding as well. So I will be presenting now some of the findings of my research, basically specifically in the workplace. So women who have children in the workplace, how do they deal with that? How do they balance work and family? And how do they give their children the best start in life while they are working on their career advancement as well? And how much Lebanon is supportive for that? So this will be the topic of the presentation. So basically, I'll start by talking a little bit about breastfeeding. Suboptimal breastfeeding contributes yearly to 800,000 infant deaths worldwide. So infants really die because they are not breastfed. And the World Health Organization recommends exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. Breastfeeding benefits not only the child, it also benefits the mom. It protects her from cancer, from arthritis and from osteoporosis, and it protects the child from infections that are allergic and from viruses and bacteria. Breastfeeding is also associated with a higher IQ in babies and in a stable emotional bond between the mother and the child. So what are the chances for a Lebanese woman to advance in her career in parallel with her choice to optimally breastfeed her child? Studies in the US and Australia show that it's a challenge for mothers to continue breastfeeding after they come back to the workplace. And they have to face numerous obstacles. So these findings apply also elsewhere, not only in Lebanon. So before I did the study, I did a pre-study which is qualitative. So we talked with women, we talked with firm owners, with employers, and so on. And we also talked with public policy makers, and we checked the law in Lebanon. And we realized that the Lebanese law does not mention anything about protecting women who want to breastfeed in the workplace or who want to continue beyond maternity leave. And maternity leave in Lebanon is only 7 weeks. So, and then it was up to 10 weeks a few years ago. So it's not enough. And the policies that are in the workplaces are also based on the law, and they do not mention anything about how to help women to continue breastfeeding their children beyond maternity leave. I have some statements from women who participated in the research. One of them said, "I work in an institution and my dean forced me to work on my maternity leave. He also obliged me to do weekly meetings with him during my maternity, and these meetings were extending from 9 to 5. So this mother was forced to leave her child the whole day in order to be able to keep her job. Otherwise, I will lose the position that I have worked for a total of 9 years. So she is either forced to leave her work or to choose her baby." This is another woman who chose her baby. "I just completed the survey while breastfeeding my son, something I can now do during the day because I left my job. If there was childcare facility at my workplace, I would not have left." So she is either forced to stay with her child and leave her career behind, or she is forced to go to her career and leave her child. 159 women whose mean age, the average age was 34 years, participated in this online survey. And they all had 1, 2, or 3 children. And they all breastfed at least one of their children. So they are employed in Lebanon, they speak English very well to be able to continue the survey, and they have at least 1 child. 92% of the participants agreed that they are committed to breastfeeding. So women really want to breastfeed their children. And 92% agreed that breastfeeding is the best way to feed their babies. 96%, so almost everyone, believed that they needed a longer maternity leave to be able to take care of their children. So speaking of maternity leave, 23% of the women, so almost 1 out of every 4 women in Lebanon, do not have a paid maternity leave. 0 weeks. 0 weeks of paid maternity leave. The average maternity leave is 8.5 fully paid, 1.7 partially paid, and 2.5 unpaid. So this averages almost to a total of 3 months, while the World Health Organization recommends 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding. So the mom has to leave her child at 3 months and find a way in order to continue this relationship. So what do? They have to pump and store milk in the workplace in order to give it to their child while they are away. 43% of these women had a supportive workplace for breastfeeding. The other 57 were not supported to continue the relationship with their child. Out of 107 women who had a supervisor in the workplace, so they are not the head, they have someone who is heading the work and directing it, 47% agreed that their employer or supervisor was supportive of breastfeeding. The other 53% were not supported by their supervisor. And more of that, 26% received negative comments about their breastfeeding. So they were harassed, they were not able to continue, they were told to stop. They were told that this is hindering the workplace and this is not acceptable. 96 women who were employed full-time, so they start working at 8, they come back at 5 at home. 58% could not find a place to breastfeed or to pump milk for their babies. So there is no place, private space or spot in the workplace to be able to pump milk for their babies. I know women who are pumping in the bathroom. I know women who are pumping in the car. And I know women who are pumping in a filing cabinet because they do not have a private place in the workplace to pump in for their babies. And 27% of the women who participated into the survey were worried about keeping their job. So basically they were told that you might not be able to continue your job because you are breastfeeding your baby, because you are following the World Health Organization recommendation to exclusively breastfeed your child for 6 months of life. So 65% of the participants are satisfied with their career progress, while the other 35% are not satisfied. So 1 out of 3 women is not satisfied with her career advancement. She is not advancing in her career. 52% have institutional support towards their career aspirations, while the other half are not supported in the workplace to continue what they aspire to do in their career. 50% receive the networking exposure they need to advance in their career, while the other half also are not being exposed well in the workplace in order to advance in their careers and to become the women in leadership that they would like to become. So almost half of the women with children do not receive support or exposure to advance their career. And almost half of the women are not able to continue to breastfeed because of their aspirations and work. What we are hoping for is to use these preliminary findings in order to push for policies in the workplace to protect these women, in order to be able to balance between their personal life and their career, in order to be able to reach their career aspirations and as well take care of their children in the way that they see optimal. After all, for women, and when we say that we are with gender equity and we are protecting the women, we say that the woman should be free to choose whatever she likes to choose to do with her body and to do with her life. So if we are not supporting her to offer her children the best she wants to offer to them, and if we are not supporting her to advance in her career, we are not giving the women the support and the protection that they need in order to continue their life the way they want to. So we are hoping also to push for an extended maternity leave and policies that protect the woman from harassment in the workplace if she decides to breastfeed. Thank you for listening.
A very interesting study about breastfeeding in the workplace and corporate support for women who have young children. We agreed earlier that we will take, after each presentation, we can take a couple of burning questions, and then we will leave the discussion till the end for all four. So if we have any burning question, we can take it now, or we can postpone it towards till the end. Yes?
Hi, my name is Francesca. First of all, thank you for your presentation. I think it's very, very interesting and very important, especially for someone like me. I hope to have children in the future, but I also don't want to stop my career. I was wondering, I have a master's degree in gender and policy, so I'm very interested in the policy aspect of what you were talking about. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on having a more holistic policy in terms of work-life balance that would also include the role of the father in that. And because I think that work-life balance shouldn't only focus on the role of the women having to take care of her family and working at the same time. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that were, especially focusing on the role of the father.
Right. So what we are hoping for is not only to concentrate on breastfeeding in say. We're just hoping that she would have a longer maternity leave. She would have flexible work time arrangements, so she might be able to leave the workplace for 1 hour or a couple of hours, or switch from break in the middle of the day to another day. We are hoping that fathers, and I know a new father, he had his child 3 days ago, and he was saying that, why should I come back to work tomorrow? I mean, my child is a new baby, a newborn. I want to take care of my wife. I want to take care of my baby. I want to emotionally bond with my child. So fathers are not allowed that as well in Lebanon. Other countries have embraced paternity leave already, but in Lebanon we do not have that as well. So we are hoping that we will push for a policy that is basically has the infant and the baby in the center of it, and the workplace, the mother, the father will be able to support. So that's what we are hoping for. And if we care for gender equity, we should embrace the role of the father as well as the mother in taking care of the child.
Yes, my name is Diab. I was wondering, have you looked into the implications of implementing such policies on women's careers? Because there's a lot of studies that show that actually the more you extend the maternity leave and the more you give such time off work to breastfeed, and especially that this is all on the expenses of the employer. I mean, this will reduce the chances of women having even access to employment, because the employer would be more reluctant to hire women, since all the burden of these expenses in Lebanon lies on the employer and not the government.
What we are hoping for is that the policy is just a preliminary thing that start a wave of awareness. So if people are more aware about the importance of childcare, about breastfeeding, about all of that, they should understand that the role of the woman in the family and the role of the father in the family, and how they affect the child and how they affect the workplace. After all, if a person comes back to work and they are forced to do things, like they feel that, or they are harassed because of their comments about breastfeeding, they will not be productive. So if a woman wants to be productive in the workplace, she wants to know that she is offering to her child what she wants to offer. Now, the results that I presented are only preliminary results, so they are not the final results of the study. I'm still working on the study, and I still have 2 years to go. But I know that from personal experience that a woman can leave work for a long maternity leave, and she can come back and be productive, and she can advance in her career. I left work for 6 months. I took an unpaid leave to take care of my child and to breastfeed for 6 months. And then I came back to work, and I'm really productive. And I'm now looking forward for a promotion. And I'm working on my doctorate as well, in parallel with my work and full-time and my children. So women can do a lot if they are supported by a good husband, if they are supported by family, and if they are supported by the workplace. But we just need to change the mentality. If we are going to keep thinking that this is time away from work, this is money for the company, this is all that. Like, we have to have a bigger picture and look at the bigger picture and raise awareness in the workplace and the employers in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you. We take the last question.
My name is Nat. From a benchmark perspective, how long usually is the maternity leave in other countries on average, and how does it compare to developing? And my second question is, how do other countries who are quote unquote better at gender equality at the workplace deal with women breastfeeding at work?
We have maternity leave that starts from where Lebanon starts, up to 1.5 years.
But what's the most frequent?
Most frequent is 6 months to 1 year in Europe and in North America. But they have maternity leaves of 1 year. They have maternity leaves of 1.5 years. So there are long maternity leaves that allow the women to breastfeed their child. And in more open places where the woman is more respected for her role as a mother, they are allowed private spaces to complement for their babies. They are allowed childcare arrangements for their babies, so like there would be a nursery right next to the work. So the woman can take breaks of 20 or 30 minutes and go breastfeed her child and come back. And there are as well all the facilities that allow her to store and keep all of them.
If you want to use your authority, I can give you. So because we are running this. Sorry, Charlotte. You're the leader here, so and this is about you. All right, we'll move on. I'm very happy to. Pascale Daher is a doctoral researcher at the Aston Business School. I asked her to kindly introduce herself, and she'll be talking about the effective participation of Lebanese women at work and in leadership positions. I guess this is where it's based on your doctoral dissertation.
Hi everyone, my name is Pascale. Is it working? Yeah. Okay, so I'm Pascale. I just now submitted actually my PhD, and this is what I'm presenting today is just part of what I did in my PhD, but it's the sample mostly, which is a sample, my only Lebanese sample, basically. So before joining the doctoral program, I worked in the services sector in Lebanon for almost 10 years, and then I went and, did my PhD. My PhD is mostly centered around women in leadership, so I am very much interested in gender and leadership, and this is what I'm presenting today. So we would look at women having a firmer grip, and I look at the role of leader gender, leadership styles, and follower gender. So I condensed this as much as possible, and apologies for now if I talk a bit more about underlying research for what I will be talking about. So starting with the research problem. So I'm very much interested in the effectiveness of women or females in leadership positions, and particularly in the Lebanese context. And this basically stems from the fact that research really tells us that we tend to hold lots of gender stereotypes. So we have stereotypes of what men are like, what women are like, but not only that, but also what they ought to be like. So how they're supposed to behave. And when we think about leadership, we mostly match leadership with a male stereotype. So leadership is really a lot of a male prerogative. And while we see in Western countries it's starting to move a bit further of just being a male prerogative, it still is very much male-typed. So when we think about stereotypes for a man, like being assertive, being dominant, prescribing roles, we tend to juxtapose those with leadership. When we think about female attributes, such as being kind, warm, compassionate, it's not that we judge those attributes as not good, but rather we do not match them with the role of a leader. If we look at a Lebanese context, we find that our society is very much constrained by gender roles. So there's lots of traditionally held gender roles, and this poses lots of obstacles for women, basically, rising to leadership positions, because what views we hold about women do not really match with our idea of a good leader. And we see that those obstacles, they happen at many levels. So there are lots of cognitive, emotional, cultural obstacles that hinder women. And thus the paradigm of think manager, when we ask people to think of a manager, they actually think male. So there is this saying like men take charge and women take care. So kind of it's still prominent, and particularly in our society. And this leads us basically to just leadership, just being a male prerogative. So what do women need to do in order to be very much accepted into the workplace? So in order to run this research, which is quantitative based, we have to build a conceptual framework. So the main interesting question is, what is the link between leader gender and perceptions or measures of leadership effectiveness? How are women able to drive leadership effectiveness? And in order to answer this question, of course we did a literature review. I will not go through that. I'm happy to discuss that later on if you're interested. But we draw on a new theoretical framework. So basically we use the social identity theory of leadership, or SITL for short. This theory is based on social identity theory, which basically says that we have a propensity to form groups, and those groups are very important for our self-definition. What SITL basically tells us is that the most effective leader is the one who is most considered prototypical. And when we look at prototypicality, we actually take this leader who embodies the values and the norms of the group. So the person who represents the group the most is the person who's considered prototypical. And prototypical leaders are able to drive leadership effectiveness. So we want then to see, okay, if we are a group of people working in an organization, the person who would most likely be accepted in a leadership position is the person who's most prototypical. And because leadership is a lot male-typed, we tend to see that the prototypical leader would be male, or even more importantly, someone who actually behaves according to the norms of the group. And with groups being very much male-typed in organizations, we want someone who behaves in a male-typed manner. So what Siddle tells us as well is that leaders who are not prototypical, so if we are in a group and then we get a leader who's not someone who really represents who we are, this person can engage in some behaviors so that they are prototypical. And here we draw on expectancy violations theory. I will not bore you with this theory a lot. But what the theory basically just tells us, it's a perceptual bias that tells us that if someone behaves counter-stereotypically, they actually benefit from one sort of a bias. So, like this interesting research, they did a research on men who behave in an altruistic manner, and they got higher favorable ratings than women who engage in the same type of behavior. Because it's not expected of them to behave altruistically, whereas women, it's taken for granted. So in the same token, we argue that, okay, for women to be good, they have to engage in a male-like leadership behavior, and that would be directive leadership. If a woman behaves in directive leadership, they would be more favorably rated than a man who behaves in the same type of behavior, because women are not expected to behave like that. To complicate things a bit further, we also said, okay, so if a woman behaves like that, it doesn't necessarily have to work with all followers. So we integrate the role of follower gender. Okay, so who is the woman actually leading? And here we draw on uncertainty reduction, and we'll be very brief on this theory as well. So as we join groups, we have a tendency, we want to reduce uncertainty. So we want a leader who actually we can trust and we know how to behave in front of this leader. When a woman takes a leadership role, she is very much likely to evoke feelings of uncertainty because a woman is atypical in a leadership role. And from other research, we know that lots of people might not very much trust that a woman will actually get them the results they want to get at. And because males hold more gender stereotypes than females, so we would say that a woman who engages in directive leadership would be able to drive leadership effectiveness specifically with her male followers. So male followers would want the female leader to engage in directive leadership more than female followers. This is one of the hypotheses, which is exactly what I explained now. And what did we find? So we collected data from 10 organizations in the services sector. We had 131 participants, almost an equal gender split. It's noteworthy that we've got a bit more female leaders than male leaders. And we measured outcomes, perceptions of leadership effectiveness, leader-member exchange, so how good they develop relationships with leaders with followers, and supervisory ratings of performance. And actually we found exactly what we hypothesized for. So females who engage in directive leadership, so who engage in this male-like leadership behavior, they were considered more prototypical, and thus they were more effective, particularly for their male followers. So directive leadership did not work for females, but it actually worked for males. So what does this all mean? So we advance several theoretical contributions. So we offer a new way of looking at effectiveness of female leaders, but I'd rather not go into details on that, but focus more on practical contributions. So of course we know that this is not ideal, right? We don't want women to deviate from their natural way of leading. So this is not a permanent solution, but as long as we still hold gender stereotypes, this could be one way forward for women to actually gain influence into the workplace. So until gender stereotypes in our societies change, this is one solution that we can bring forward to women. And this is very important also for organizations to support women when they resort to directive leadership. Like I know from personal experience, when I had a manager and she would come and be very directive, she's often called as, what's she PMSing, is she moody, like calling her the B word and stuff. So it's just having a more supportive environment for women who engage in different leadership behaviors, such as directive leadership. But also, this tells us that women have to be selective in when they exercise directive leadership. So for male followers, this would be a good way to go about it. With female followers, this is not really ideal. Also managers and raters, also interviewers who are asked really to evaluate the behavior of women, to actually to rate their performance favorably if they have to resort to directive leadership. We also know that this type of leadership style, it fosters leader-member relationships. But also one of the main things we need to highlight. So what if the prototypical leadership behavior is not male? So we've got lots of organizations that are female typed. So we do not address that in this research, but that would certainly implicate different leadership behavior. Of course, the study has a lot of limitations. So in our model, we do not find effects on performance. We find it on perceptions of leadership effectiveness. We find it on leader-member relationships, but not on performance. Our data is taken from a common source, so it's just a cross-sectional survey. An individual level of analysis, but I will not develop that further unless you're very interested in the analysis. Yeah. Thank you.
Question? Yeah, there is research that shows that women are better at transformational leadership. How do your findings, intersect with that?
Yeah, I mean, it shows that there's a significant but a very small difference that they are better at transformational leadership, but yet we still see very little representation. We still see backlash effects. So it doesn't mean that when they engage in transformational leadership, this is not panning out to actually them being rated more effective. So there has to be something that they need to address, in order to be effective. So, yeah.
Interesting. Yes?
My name is Milad Purnik from UCLA World Policy Analysis Center. I'm wondering, do you think, I guess maybe you studied other sectors, because in Lebanon you just looked at the service sector.
Yeah.
So is it something that is different in the service sector that, it's particularly responsive to this, or is it something that is more generalizable? Is interesting for me to think of.
Okay. Well, when we conduct such research, our aim is to actually make it generalizable. But of course, we still with these findings cannot take the context out of it. So, like I said, in prototypically female leadership organizations, so for example, if we looked at care workers, for example, that are very much typically female, then I'm sure this would not, behaving directive would not render them prototypical, but rather they have to engage in something different. So probably a more communal leadership style would work better. So I would say this is generally for business settings, organizational settings that are still regarded somehow prototypically male rather than female. But it would change, of course, with organizational typing.
That's an excellent point. Yeah.
Sorry, I asked a lot of questions. I know it may not be the focus of your research, but I was wondering if you thought about why women are expected to be more docile leaders, or to have different expectations of how their leadership should be, and maybe how to challenge that.
Okay. I mean, this stems from massively ingrained gender stereotypes. I mean, we start from evolutionary psychology, basically, up to stereotypes that we really hold in society. So women are just expected to take care, while men are expected to take charge. So your question of how to tackle those gender stereotypes, wow, I mean, I don't know, maybe it starts with conferences like these in changing things. I don't know. It's a very big topic.
Challenge. Well, thank you very much. We'll hopefully get back to that, and I'm also very happy to introduce our next panelist, who is Nour Kachicho, independent researcher reading through the abstract of what she's going to talk about. She's going to talk about she's going to have a closer look at Lebanese female filmmakers. So I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, so I'm an independent researcher, and this was part of my dissertation for the London School of Economics and Political Science for my MSc in Gender, Media and Culture. Unlike the rest of the panelists, I am no longer in academia. I am now in marketing, so very different, very far away from this. But I hope to maybe pursue this and expand on this specific research one day. So I am very pleased to be presenting my research titled Lebanese Female Filmmakers, Breaking Through Authorship, Perspective and Voice. It was submitted in August 2016 as part of the dissertation, as I earlier mentioned. And it was, so the research span was over 3 months, so it may not be as in-depth as you hope to hear. The main research question is, why are a large proportion of Lebanese female filmmakers able to enter the cinematic field? So I looked at the global scale, where existing academic research and media focused around the topic of filmmakers, to see that there's a big global proportional difference between male and female filmmakers, a big gender gap. However, I was very pleased that when I was actually looking at Lebanon on a more local level, that there was a smaller proportional difference to some extent, where more female filmmakers were entering the field, studying filmmaking, creating shorts, and eventually creating feature films. I was extremely excited to cover an unresearched field, but I also noticed that there was a very short amount of data existing around female filmmakers in Lebanon, and just gender and filmmaking in general. And so the method of my research was quantitative data collection, which was a little bit tricky, as I said, and qualitative in-depth interviews with 15 Lebanese female filmmakers, not necessarily residing in Lebanon, but Lebanese and across the world, and filming in Lebanon. So just to place female filmmakers on the map, I wanted to first look at numbers and compare between the global and the local. So on a global level, cinema has been described to be white and masculine by research. Well, this is changing. There is still a very long way to go. Only 9% of filmmakers in the US are women, and only 8% of UK filmmakers between 2007 and 2012 were female. And as the British Film Institute has stated, women are underrepresented behind the camera. And the European Women's Audiovisual Network recently said, there is a growing concern about the marginalization of female directors in world film culture. As research also pointed out, the level of investment increased in percentage of as women filmmakers decreased. However, it is important to contextualize and look at Lebanon, for instance, separately, and associate the gender gaps to each country differently. And there are more and more female filmmakers working in and coming out of Lebanon. There are more and more female filmmakers. Is it on? Sorry, there are more and more female filmmakers working in and coming out of Lebanon, many of which live abroad. But I do want to mention that there. Can you hear me? Thank you. Okay. Great. And I just need to reiterate that the gender gap still exists. However, it is a lot smaller in Lebanon. And Lebanese, to look at the local level, Lebanese filmmakers, 57% are male and 43% are female today. And as you can see, there is a big difference between local and global in that sense. And in 2016, women directed 28% of feature films and 56% of short films. And between 1933 and 2009, Lebanese female filmmakers increased over the time, as you can see in the chart that I have on the PowerPoint presentation. And across 2000-2010, 46% of females were directing short films. But what do all those numbers mean, and why are they significant? I would like to explain why, looking at authorship, looking at the female filmmaker, like why is it important to differentiate? So we must firstly look at filmmakers as auteurs. So to give you a backstory, auteur theory was born in the 1960s and as a need to incorporate cinema as a classical art instead of a commercial, giving it more depth and looking at the actual meaning of film and who is actually behind the film. So therefore, the filmmaker was seen as an agent bearing semantic weight, as through film there is a personal expression. And as we can see, it's also a second identification. The filmmaker can be seen as a fictional character in the film itself. So by categorizing filmmakers by gender, we acknowledge separate life experiences, and having both genders represented in film therefore is very important in terms of voice, visibility, stories, and generally expression. With this, yeah. So my findings of interviewing 15 female filmmakers and all the data collected, I found 4 major points that may explain why it is slightly more easier for females to enter the field, the cinematic field in Lebanon, as a comparative point to the global level. So firstly, I think that this point actually complements Pascale's presentation very well, because it looks at the culture and the gender roles in society, and more specifically Lebanese society. So as I found out that males are often more encouraged to go towards the sciences and females more towards the arts, which could be explanatory for why females are entering the field. And this is possibly due to resistance of the Lebanese society and parents, and which is possibly a collective conscience that exists, unfortunately. So I looked at university enrollment, and for instance, at the Lebanese Academy of Fine Arts, ALBA, undergrad students who were enrolled in film schools between 2010 and 2015, 54% were female on average, more than half. And similarly at NDU, Notre Dame University, the radio television program saw between 2012 and 2016, 56% female, again. A teacher and female filmmaker stated about male students, "You feel that their heart is here, but that in the field it is too risky and not sustainable enough for them," which is why they were studying more scientific, more of a scientific field, and they would just take these classes as just electives. So on another subject of the research also stated, "In New York, people sometimes look up to me for being a filmmaker, but in Lebanon I am often asked, but what is your real job?" Ziad Wairi, a filmmaker, said in an interview that society was a mentality problem, and that was why he saw that more female filmmakers were there and male filmmakers were fewer. And therefore, the question can be maybe reversed. What is pulling males away from the film industry? It would be an interesting research to expand on. And so this brings us closer to look at the film industry in Lebanon, my second point. Cinema as an underdeveloped industry. So when looking at the global level and Hollywood, I found that women were marginalized as the film industry grew. And this was because of the patriarchal structure, and to some extent. And financially as well. So the European Women's Audiovisual Network said in 2015, men received between 80% and 90% of national funding, and female-directed films are considered less commercially viable. However, looking at the local level, there is actually, the film industry is almost inexistent. However, it is growing. So when I say inexistent, I mean lack of state support and no grants for films, which actually leaves a lot of filmmakers to fund the films themselves. So the Lebanese industry is growing though, with 4 feature films in 2004 and now 31 in 2014, which is, as you can see, a huge difference. Out of the filmmakers interviewed, 3 founded their own production houses to secure projects, and 4 funded films through crowdfunding websites such as Zumal and Indiegogo and Kickstarter. So, however, there are positive aspects to the developing industry. It does suggest a flexibility in terms of themes and stories, so it's more unmediated to a certain extent, apart from censorship that does exist. And it permits shooting scenes to be more accessible. And however, there's no patriarchal structure, which also allows females to enter more easily, which is supported by no discrimination in that case. I mean, not no discrimination, but almost no discrimination. So actually, while I was doing my research, a lot of people would say Nadine Labake whenever I would say I was studying Lebanese female filmmakers. In fact, Nadine Labake turned out to be a big inspiration to a lot of the female filmmakers who entered the field. So 4 out of 10 filmmakers said that Nadine Labake was an influence, and especially because of her success with Caramel in 2007, being recognized locally but also very much internationally. The first Lebanese film to be released theatrically in the US. And she also introduced themes that were very different, so female solidarity, and was capturing reality very authentically. She brought a new image, but also more acceptance to female filmmakers. One of the Lebanese female filmmakers said, Nadine Labake gave my mother an alternative image of filmmaking and helped her accept the field. So therefore, a new image for Lebanese cinema, followed by strengthening the Lebanese film industry and encouraging more women to enter the field. The last point that I found that was very important, very significant, was actually voice and expression and recognition of experiences. So this actually follows auteur theory very much. We can say that film is a tool for expression. It's personal, expressed, but also it's very representative of a collective of experiences felt. Women telling their stories, subconsciously maybe, and maybe not, but also stories of other women tackling important subjects that are unheard in the media and the news, such as sexual assault, domestic abuse, and marital rape. Film is also a perspective, so it's about hearing the voice of the female, which is actually sometimes very difficult to do, especially in Lebanon. But obstacles do exist in terms of voice and expression. So, for example, co-producing a film tends to give global visibility, but also contributes to loss of identity. So when you co-produce, you have to accept a lot of the terms of the people you are co-producing with, especially when they're not Lebanese and they have other they want to do it differently. So, and there, of course, there is censorship to a certain extent, but voice and expression is very much important and significant in cinema. So just to conclude, I hope that this research will encourage more unresearched areas in Lebanese cinema as it continues to expand with time, and look at contemporary themes, because mainly a lot of what I found covered the Lebanese civil war in cinema, but not necessarily women in cinema and other new and contemporary themes that are expanding. And I hope to draw attention to the underdeveloped industry and help it grow. And lastly, I hope that this will reflect on Lebanese female filmmakers and encourage more women to enter the field so that we may hear more stories about women and for women. Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation in a very promising industry that Lebanon can have a competitive advantage at the national level in. So it's a very, very interesting. We always talk about Lebanon being in the banking industry and finance industry. Filmmaking is a very important industry. Questions? Yes.
I have a question, but I need you to, if I propose it wrong, tell me. Usually when you want to know the culture of a country, you see their films and the women in their films. Not talking about Nadine Labake or the people who are doing the films. I'm talking about the films. Usually I see that films project a wrong image of the Lebanese woman. Yani they are discriminating us and sexually harassing us via the image that they are reflecting about a Lebanese woman, that she's here. Usually Nadine Labake is the one that did that, so I see her as a discriminator, personally.
Thank you for your point. I think that's, of course, a personal opinion, I'm sure, yeah. So, but that's why I also say that it's important to have females behind the camera, because they're able to control more the image of the woman in front of the camera, which I hope that you will enjoy more films that have more representative images of women that you can relate to.
Hi, I'm Cynthia. I'm a public health practitioner. I just have, most of my friends are in the film industry and I've helped them out on sets sometimes. While your presentation shows that women are in power in that field, from my observations and from what I hear from my friends, is that it's a very male-dominated and misogynistic environment. Well, if you have a focus puller, if you have someone, a gaffer or something, they won't take you seriously if you're a woman behind the camera who's a filmmaker. And the way that they respond to men is completely different. And I wanted to know what's your opinion about that. Thank you.
So thank you for your question. My research focused more on the quantities, so more related to the proportional difference between male and female filmmakers. I did, however, go a bit more in depth when I was interviewing the filmmakers, and as you suggest, some did find it a bit difficult. But it also depends on their position, so whether they are the actual filmmaker, the director, or whether they're working on the set and working maybe for somebody else who may be a bit more discriminatory. I hope I've answered your comments. We can discuss this later.
Two tough questions, you know. All right. Last but certainly not least, Dr. Abdulrahim, Associate Professor at the Faculty of Health Sciences at the UV. She's going to talk about the links between gender wage inequalities and education.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here and to speak after, to give my talk after three very interesting talks that were presented already. My talk is on the relationship between education and gender wage inequalities. And the data that I will show, I'll show just very basic descriptive results of a study that I'm involved in. Focuses on Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. So it's a very select group. The data is very particular, but I'm hoping that the issue, that I'll do justice to presenting the issue related to women's education and gender wage inequalities. So education from a development point of view is one of the main human capabilities. And specifically with respect to gender, education is seen as a capability that provides women with choice and with the ability to to choose or to live in the way that they feel fits their needs and aspirations. I teach and work in the Faculty of Health Sciences, and education is extremely important for our work and research. There's ample evidence that education, particularly education of women, is very much associated with better, much improved women's and children's health outcomes, the education of the mother, of course. And there are so many writings about the mechanisms through which education improves health. One of the mechanisms relates to how education increases choices, increases social mobility of women, and improves living conditions, and these are all factors that improve health. But another main issue that we don't discuss a lot in public health is how education contributes to incomes of women, to women's ability to participate in the workforce and to actually have an income. And in fact, the whole issue of income, participation of women in the workforce and their income has not been addressed a lot in research on gender in the region. And most of the research on this talks about what is called the gender paradox in the Arab region, where level of education of Arab women has increased and improved a lot since the 1950s. However, this was not matched by an improvement in women's participation in the workforce. So I just want to show some data on women, gender and education. So I've included some data on Egypt, Jordan, and Palestine. And this is from UNICEF, and this covers school completion by grade for boys and girls. it shows that at every grade level, girls actually complete that level of education at a slightly higher rate compared to boys. Actually, at the secondary level, you see that girls in red and the boys in orange, the girls actually are completed at a much higher rate in Jordan and in Palestine. However, what we have, the gender paradox, what we have in the Arab region, is that despite these achievements in education, women do not participate in the workforce at a rate that we would expect. So this is for Egypt, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon. And you see that the difference in workforce participation between women and men is huge. And the participation of women in Jordan and Palestine is extremely low. Just to give you an idea of how the region, if we look at the Middle East and North Africa, if you use that term, how women, in terms of their workforce participation in the Arab region compared to women in other parts of the world. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of women's participation in the workforce. And then you see the world around globally, 50% of women participate in the workforce. In the region, in the Middle East and North Africa region, only slightly higher than 20% of the women participate in the labor force. So in this region, we are less than half in terms of women's participation in the workforce. So this is basically the gender paradox. Why is it that despite these quick educational achievements for women in the region, why is it that they don't participate in the workforce? And most of the literature on this actually has explained the phenomenon by talking about Arab culture and the family in Arab culture. And what I would like, through some of the research that I'm doing, is to actually present this idea that maybe women don't participate as much in the workforce because maybe they face discrimination in the workforce, and part of that discrimination relates to the wages that they earn. So while the gender paradox talks about this, why is it that women who have high levels of education don't participate? The other paradox that I would like to present is that why is it that women who participate in the workforce experience this discrimination, and how does that discrimination manifest? Like I mentioned, there's really little evidence on this. There are some studies in Jordan and in Egypt that show actually divergent findings. So in some studies in Jordan, there's evidence that as women's education increases, their wages, the question is that does education improve the wages of women or does it not improve their wages? And a study in Jordan actually presented some evidence that as women's level of education increases, the gender wage inequality the gap starts to close a little bit. But there's also evidence from Egypt that found that actually when women have higher levels of education and enter the professional workforce, basically work in professional jobs, that in fact the gender wage discrimination increases for these women. So the data that I'm looking at was collected by the International Labour Organization. The data is a bit dated from 2011, and it specifically focuses on Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. Again, it's really important to study this phenomenon among groups of women who earn low wages. We're not talking about women who work in academia or who work in the corporate sector in the country. And just some basic information for those of you who are not from Lebanon, if there's anybody in the audience, that there are 450,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon who are registered with the UN Relief and Works Agency. However, there's evidence that almost half of them no longer live in Lebanon, that they've migrated out, and the actual number of this group is around 260 to 280,000 who reside in Lebanon. This is based on a study carried out by faculty members at UB. This is a protracted refugee group. Both men and women face tremendous obstacles to working in the Lebanese labor force, but particularly women, of course. And this is due to clear exclusionary policies related to employment, related to property ownership, and other civil rights. So the data that was collected by the International Labour Organization is a large data set, but we limit our analysis to only those who are 21 years or older, because we wanted to really see whether university education has an impact on employment, on wages actually for those who are employed. So out of 5,241 individuals who are over the age of 21 or 21 and older, we found that less than half, 2,466 were employed. And then we looked at the characteristics of the employed by gender. So you see that the number of women who are employed is small, 449 only, and 2017 men are employed. And this is our sample, basically. So our outcome variable is really wages. We look at mean wages in the study. And the main independent variables were gender and education. We're interested in looking at whether education improves the wages of women and closes the gap between men and women's wages. We also control for marital status, occupation, and other work-related variables that have an impact on wages. I'm only going to present some descriptive results here, so you don't need to worry about what we adjusted for. But there's a trend that is in the data that's also in so many other studies related to women's participation in the workforce, that women's and men's, that in fact men get married after they join the workforce and become employed and earn wages, whereas women stop working. In general, of course, women stop working after they get married, and there's this cultural understanding that a woman can work until she gets married and have children, and then her main focus should be on maintaining her household and raising her children. So you see here that out of the employed men, 75% of them are married, and out of the employed women, 37% of them are married. And most or half of the employed women are single. Here, this slide shows the educational attainments of the men and women who are employed in our sample. And you see, if you focus on secondary education and university education or higher, you see that women fare much better than men. Palestinian women who work fare much better than men who work. So 20% of Palestinian women who work have a university degree or higher, but only 9.7% of the men have a university degree or higher. There's also occupational segregation, of course. Now there's occupational segregation for Palestinians in general. This is business language. So Palestinians don't work in all the occupations in Lebanon. They are concentrated in specific occupations. And you see here that if you look at the occupations that women engage in, they are actually higher level occupations. So they work as managers, professionals, associate professionals, and in clerical support. Of course, men work more in construction and agriculture and in other occupational sectors that women do not work in. But if you look at these rates or these numbers, it's clear that women actually have higher occupational, they engage in higher occupational positions compared to men. So let's look at wages, and specifically wages by education. What we see, and the numbers for women get a little bit small here. But what we see is if you can compare just the bolded numbers in every row, you see that at every educational level, women earn significantly lower wages compared to men. So it's not that women in general earn lower wages, it's women at every educational level earn lower wages compared to men of the same level of education. And this is significant. The important finding also is that as level of education increases, the mean difference between men and women's wages increases until the university level. It comes down a little bit. And this is really important to talk about and address in terms of, presenting education always as a way of addressing gender inequality in society. That in fact, with higher levels of education, at least with respect to wages, you see that discrimination increases and gender inequality increases in this case. And this is a graph that just shows the same results in the table. It shows that men at every educational level earn higher wages, and that the gap between men and women slightly increases with increasing level of education until it only slightly closes at the university level. So, thank you. So in conclusion, despite their favorable educational profile, Palestinian women in Lebanon who are employed and earn wages, they earn lower wages, significantly lower wages compared to men, and that the gender wage gap or gender inequalities in wages increases with increasing level of education and closes only slightly at the university level, university education level or higher. So in conclusion, the structural nature of gender inequality in the labor force persists despite women increases level of education. So thank you very much. Just very quickly, I want to acknowledge, the fact that the International Labour Organization gave us this data set to work on freely and not to consult with them on any results that we want to present. And I want to thank Dr. Fatima Ghaddar, who helped me with some of the basic analysis for this study. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah. But what I found interesting in one of the slides related to the gender paradox, if you look at the top level positions that women and men occupy, and exclude basically the lower level positions, you find that the number of men and women are the same at around 400 people. So this slide. Yes, so if you sum the first 4 rows, and then you get an almost equal number, which is very interesting. And then the gender gap could be driven by the fact that you have more men working at a lower level, lower level positions, because they can't quote unquote work in Lebanon. So, but there is less gender paradox at the upper level positions. What do you think about that?
Okay. I haven't shown any differences in the wages that men and women receive by occupation, but they are similar to education also. And in models we will adjust for occupation as well, because that's also very important. One of the explanations that we have is that because wages for women are very low, that in fact maybe women do not go out and work unless they are able to work in some of the more professional occupation or higher level occupations. But still, despite that fact, when we look at the education, the returns on education for women, it's much lower than men. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Suma Rifai, and I come back from a political party. For the past 16 years, we've been suffering to get women involved in politics. And after looking all of this, we came up with the idea that women are restricted because of a lot of barriers. One of the barriers, and I was noticing that you go for the academic schools like AUB, LAU, whatever, and you see that the percentage of the graduates are equally between men and women, but when it turns out to go for the working force, it goes down to 23%. And I was just wondering, is it just the wages? is it how to solve this? There is an issue, big issue, and I was we're researching, and part of it is because of what do you call عادات وتقاليد, cultural restrictions and whatever I call it restrictions. And my question is, do you think if you go for the labor laws and change the labor laws, do you think this is a good measure, or is it the only measure we can use to start pushing women into the working era? What do you think?
So you mean, the first presenter talked about breastfeeding, for example. So maybe, a lot of the writings on the low women's participation in the labor force in the Arab region talk about culture and family, and that is something that is intervening with women's ability to participate at a higher rate in the workforce. That reflects their level of education. Maybe yes. I think it's all connected. The purpose of my presentation is to say that yes, we acknowledge that there are family issues and cultural issues, but maybe one of the other reasons is that women face discrimination in the labor force, and maybe that's why this discourages them from participating. If they have some, cultural beliefs to fall on that tell them it's okay if you don't work. Especially after you get married, it's the man's job to provide. So if there's discrimination in the workforce and there are these cultural factors, maybe they interact together and work to reduce women's participation.
Yeah. She was first. Yeah.
Hello. So thank you for your presentations, but what you focus. My name is Lee.
When they engage,
what you focus on in your presentation was the inequality in wages, but this problem is not only among Palestinians. It's among mostly all women in the Arab region. And it's not only, and I believe it's not that women are not achieving a higher education but it's mainly a political or a religious problem. This is something that you have not highlighted. I thought that it was not highlighted. So the stereotypes that woman is the caregiver and the man is the provider in the family has kind of put boundaries for the woman, and each of you has mentioned, if she had been provided with an appropriate maternity leave, she would actually pursue her work, or if she had acquired her more leadership skills that are similar to men, or selective exercise of leadership, she would have reached higher positions. Or the way she's portrayed in the media, they all have they all portray the weakness that the woman still that still has in the society. So for me, maybe the problem is cultural and political and religious, as I mentioned at first. But what is the approach that she would take in the society to actually overcome these boundaries? There are many conferences about it, but what do you suggest?
Yeah, please.
Your question is a lot related on how to change the behavior in a society.
Yes.
And this is what my doctorate is about. It's about social marketing, which is about using marketing tools in order to change the behavior in a society for the better. And what these theories state is that public policy and laws and all of that are not the main tool that should be used to change behavior, because they are just laws. What happens on the ground is really different, and the practice is based on what the culture is. So what they need to do is to change, not use a top-down approach, but rather use something from the ground to change the mentality of the people in order to drive the change in the behavior. So what they need to do is to create more awareness about the role of the woman, not only as the caregiver. The woman is equal to the man. The woman can do everything that a man can do, and she can do it differently. She doesn't have to do it the same way he does it, but she can do it differently and she can excel. So what we need to do, and conferences like these, they raise awareness, they try to change the stereotype that is in the society about women. They try to show that women can do things. And the main thing that should be done in Lebanon and also in the MENA region is to create awareness about the woman and her role. We need to teach our children from the beginning to change this role. Like, boys are still raised in Lebanon that they should take care of their sister, and they are the strong boy who should not cry, the boy who should be the strong person in the family. While girls are raised to play with dolls and change. We need to change that. We need to raise our children in a way to teach them that they can do things, they can excel in these things, regardless of whether they are a boy or a girl. So this thing should be a holistic change, not only a policy change. It should raise awareness amongst everyone in the society.
Okay, again, Milad from UCLA World Policy Analysis Center. I think I can add something to this discussion a little bit, because actually we look at the laws and policies in 193 countries, so we have a nice comparative picture. And I mean, when we talk about Lebanon specifically, it's interesting because it does have paid maternity leave. It's interesting that 20% don't actually implement it, so there's clearly an implementation problem that needs to be considered. But I agree with one of the points that was also raised about, okay, I agree with changing norms, but the law can help. For example, if we did grant paternity leave, it also shows it's not just for the women's role, it's also the men. Or some societies have leave where you can share between the mother and father as you wish. So those sort of things can help to push the envelope on that. And specifically with the Lebanese labor law, actually we see that on paper, it does protect against discrimination in gender on hiring, promotion, and compensation. So the fact that there is this pay gap, actually by law, you should be able to say, this is not fair. Now what happens is the other case, and it's important, but I think that it can be a very powerful tool to at least have that law in place. And throughout our work, we try to at least highlight where the legal gaps are. And then implementation, and that is for all the other people who do great work on the ground. But I do think that the law can play an important role in even shifting the norms to think maybe caregiving is also for men. Maybe there can be a more equal sharing of the burden. And last thing, in terms of the pay gap, I think you mentioned it's existing in the Arab world. I'll tell you, it's existing in the whole world. So even, you think America is great or all these other countries, it's everywhere. So it's definitely a problem that has yet to be resolved. I just wanted to highlight that so we recognize not just. Thank you.
There was a case, that was some time ago, garbage collectors in New York earned more than nurses in New York, so on average. So there was a big issue, it was a long time ago, about what could be a reason for it. And there is one reasoning that pertains to the discrimination, gender roles, etc., etc. And there is an opposing role, which many of us may not agree with, but which is the economic explanation. Economics, demand, supply, etc., determines the wages, determines the price, etc. But I agree with you, this is a worldwide problem. Yes, Dr. Ashwin.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on the point that you just made, and that beyond the cultural barriers that women face, because I've been doing some research on that too. I mean, I would like to distinguish between,
kind of two kind of barriers. The first one is the barrier to entry, just to have a job when you're 21, etc. And here there's a lot of structural constraints. It's not cultural at this point. For example, at a saturated labor market, poor economic conditions, the corruption and the need for wasta, etc. So these are really barriers to entry, plus the preference of males over females, because the burden of the maternity leaves is still on the employer. So it's only normal that they would favor males. And this is reflected in really very discriminatory selection questions in the interviews. When you start, like personal questions, are you engaged? What does your fiancé do? Are you planning to travel? Who will take care of your kids? This happens in interviews. So that's the first, mostly really like structural barriers to entry. And then once the woman is in and then she's trying to have a career progression, there are barriers to progression. And here we see some of the culture issues where the husband, the mother-in-law, the kids start nagging and making the woman feel guilty. So the shaming and the guilt really are salient. So I think woman's is her own enemy, each woman, because she internalizes the voices she hears from the society, plus the discrimination that Dr. Abdulrahim talked about, like pay gap, they don't have similar promotion opportunities, sometimes demeaning harassment. We see a lot of that at the workplace, in addition to the nagging of the family. So a lot of things that do mix together. So the woman at the end says, I'm tired, it's not worth it, I'm being humiliated, I'm being harassed, I'm being shamed and guilted, so I don't want to do it, you win. Yeah, and she gives up, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah, just to comment here, basically to confirm most of the conclusions that the panelists said. Fine. It's actually the number of male attendees in the seminar, so this is like a confirmation of what's happening socially in Lebanon. And as Sarah Diab mentioned, probably solving it from a law's perspective is not really the answer, because somebody also mentioned that it pushes the employers to avoid hiring women in general. So basically approaching it from a social perspective, so that whomever is involved in the hiring or the family, the support, the relatives also support hiring women and actually seeing successful women in society. That's just a comment or observation. Thank you.
Just really quick one, because I hear a lot about the law sort of stopping women from getting hired, because if you have so much maternity leave, then why would you hire women? But if you look at our data and you compare it with labor force participation, actually it doesn't. I mean, Sweden and all these countries which have so much maternity leave, they still have very high rates of women. So it doesn't have to be like, I agree with you with the employer. Okay, I agree with you about the financing structure can be employer provided or government provided, but still, I think if you had equal maternity and paternity, it would equalize that.
Yeah. All right, and we take your point.
Thank you very much for all of your presentations. I can easily relate. I'm a mother of 3, and also I'm doing my second master's on leadership and management in education at LAU. I've read a lot of research about women in leadership, etc. And there are a few literature related to Lebanon. This is one thing. Another thing, we're attending, as she said, conferences, etc. And there are a lot of international or maybe research in the MENA region. But after this conference, is there a call? What kind of call of action? Other than the policy making, etc. You, as women who are researching about these specific issues. Okay, I know about it. So you had an NGO. What about the other ladies here? What is the next step? After all of this research, how would you implement this vision on the ground?
Hi, I can talk for my findings. For example, what we do for participating organizations is then give them an executive summary of results, and we give them recommendations on how to take this forward. And I think this is just a very tiny step, but this is just the beginning of how we start disseminating research into the workplace. And we also, I mean, part of our deliverables is to publish a report, and I think that would also be disseminated into outlets as well. So this is just one part of starting to communicate findings or recommendations to people who already took an active part in the study. Yeah, I mean, that's on my behalf.
Yes, part of the things that can be done, since everyone in Lebanon, almost everyone is on social media, what we are doing is to create support groups on social media so that people would support each other. Like, as Dr. Rafida actually said, if a woman is starting to give up, or everyone is nagging, I cannot handle it anymore. So there would be a very huge group of supporters around her, telling her, no, don't give up, look, I did this, I was able to do that. So these support groups are very important, and they are at the level of everyone. So this would very much help women not to give up. And events and gatherings, not necessarily like formal, informal gatherings of families, so that where mothers are there, where fathers are there, where even grandmothers and everyone is there, so that, and in public areas, so that they would see and understand that women can be something else than just the mom and the
I
kid.
think one major can help is engaging all of the men, fathers or grandfathers in this. You know, not only a support group for women.
Yes, the support groups include everyone.
No,
Yeah.
I think this is a very good point. If you attended the session before when Alia Farhat from Majmoua was talking, she said that there is something that somebody else was talking about male empowerment. She said we call it male engagement, which is very important.
And I think one point that I really was interesting to me is the importance of role modeling. You talked about the importance of Nadine Labaki as a role model. Role modeling is very important, and that's why celebrating good role models, good across the spectrum of individuals, whether they are in cinema, whether they are in banking, etc. This is very important for young people to look up to. Yeah, please.
In terms of my research on Lebanese female filmmakers, I asked all of the subjects of my research whether they were connected with each other, and funnily enough, they didn't know each other, and so it would be, I think that would be another step, connecting women who are working in the same field, and so that they can help each other, support each other, and grow all together. Thank you.
Yes.
I think building on.
We still have 4 minutes, so let's make the best use of it. Yes.
I think building on that discussion and on Nour's research, Nour mentioned that Nadine Labaki brought up themes such as marital rape and themes about women in Lebanon and gender in Lebanon. So I think this would be also a step in answering her question. Another step as to how to empower women in this country, whether in the workforce or in other sectors. And I was wondering, Nour, because you said that Nadine brought up such themes in her films, did you find that with other female filmmakers as well, or did you not really look into that?
Maybe I should just make it clear that this was themes that other female filmmakers appreciated in Nadine Labaki's films. These are not my personal views. And I didn't specifically look at female filmmakers' films. It was more their life, their career path, how they entered the field. Thank you. Though that would be a great research to expand on.
I have one more. Hi again. I went 3 days ago to a We initiative with BLC. They were talking about how to manage small to medium enterprises, and they talked about competition in the Lebanese culture. And we don't share information to move forward. We keep it to ourselves because we are afraid of competition. So here, 1 minute ago, they talked about it. So, we need a cultural view. It's in our culture. We need to be aware of it.
Sorry, I don't look that often to the left, so I'm sorry. Any more questions? All right, it has been a very interesting panel and a very interesting audience as well, and thank you very much, and join me in saluting.